my name is Christine, and I'm an interviewer for Wicked Connection, and we are on a mission to help students figure out their career paths and how best to succeed in their educational field of study. So, if you're watching this right now, you've like seen the first part interview with Felipe and or the second part of the interview with Felipe. I mean, if you haven't seen both of them or either of them, I highly recommend you see both of them because he gives great insight into what his thoughts are about medical school and or if you're applying for medical school, his advice and top tips to help get into Canadian medical school. So if you're watching this right now, though, you're likely in medical school and applying for residency soon. So if you don't know already, Felipe is a family resident, a family medicine resident at the University of Toronto. He is a first year resident. And so without further ado, let's get going. But now, you mentioned some really great things about shadowing and like talking to people. How often do, or have you heard of your other residents or co-residents or like medical, or I don't know, yeah, classmates, I guess, do that before they got into medical school, or was it?
I'd say a good chunk of them actually ended up doing shadowing, but me and I'd say the majority didn't, but there was still like a sizable minority that did do some sort of shadowing, some sort of experience beforehand.
So those like in your class, the majority that didn't, do any of them regret it, medical school, or has, or is it like
Yeah, yeah. So there are a few of them that I guess wish they knew about this beforehand. I'm not sure if they regret it, but I have heard people say that if they were given the opportunity to go back in time and would they do it, they'd say no. They wouldn't do it all over again. And there were like I think four people in our year that ended up dropping out because they realized that it wasn't for them.
when
And so
when
it
did they
is
drop out? Like the fourth year or earlier?
uh three of them were in first year. And
Oh,
then I think one of them just took a leave and may or may not come back. And it's still like up in the air.
oh, okay. Sorry, I think I cut you off. Were you going to say something
No, no,
else?
you didn't. No.
Oh, okay, okay. Okay. So then, in terms of for those people that ended up figuring out it's not for them, what were their? Do you know the reasons for why they considered like decided it was not right for them?
So I know that one of them, for his case, was a bit sadder. I think he had a lot of mental health issues and he just couldn't cope with the stress. So that was one. One of them was actually a close friend of mine, and for him, he figured out it just wasn't for him. He wasn't gaining any joy out of what he was doing, and he found that out early in first year. And then he ended up leaving our class. And same thing with another one of them. And then the fourth one was actually he's just taking a leave right now. He was in second year when it happened, and we're not sure if he says that he intends to come back, but it's been a while, and I haven't really talked to him, so I'm not entirely sure.
So for the one that like said like he wasn't finding any joy, I imagine like because he was in first year though, it's quite different than fourth year
Hmm.
residency, right? So in that aspect, like did he just not enjoy the studying part, or did he knew already that he wasn't going to enjoy the intro part? Because I feel like those are very two different experiences.
So I would say it was pretty much he ended up doing some observerships with like different fields of medicine. But what he really found out was through our we have a introduction to interviewing course where you basically practice interviewing patients. You have like standardized patients that come in and you talk to them and you really hone your skills for interviewing there. And he really hated that aspect of it, and he realized quickly that if he can't even handle or if he was hating so much that he had to do these types of interviews, though that it would be very hard for him to have a career in medicine because so much of it is based upon talking to people. There are a few fields like radiology and pathology where that's not so much the forefront, and he did consider those for a while, but ultimately I think he ended up he ended up leaving, but he and ended up going into engineering.
Oh, very interesting. So
Hmm.
that it's, well, I'm glad to hear that he figured out earlier than later through medical school and maybe it's in residency. So hopefully everyone who has like graduated now in your class and or in residency are doing well and are happy at where they're at. But now let's maybe switch gears and talk about residency now. So you just got into residency. I know it must have been a totally really hard process for you. You probably took. Is it Canadian? They have two steps, right? Step one, step two, still for medical
No,
school.
no.
Oh no, it's just one.
No, we actually just have, so we don't have the step exams.
Oh, you don't.
We have
Okay.
something called the MCC or
Oh,
LMCC, which is like, and there was a part one and a part two, but they
yeah.
just canceled the part two. So there's just, you just
Was
write
it
the
because of
part one at
COVID
the end of
or?
fourth year. Basically, and then there was a lot of like, it's sort of one of those superfluous exams because it's not an exam that's for any licensing reason.
Yeah.
That's going to depend on your specific specialty.
Oh,
Whether, so if
interesting.
you do family medicine, write something called a CFPC,
Yeah.
and that's at the end of 2 years, and then you get your license.
Gotcha.
And then this exam was sort of before that, but it didn't really have a role. So then a lot of the residents council really pressured the people to stop it, and then they finally
Oh, I'm
stopped
so
it this
glad to
year.
hear because I just
Hmm.
sometimes these tests it just sounds like a money grab. Like in America, like at
It
least when
is.
I
It was
hear
three
all the
thousand dollars, so I
oh my
didn't want to write
gosh,
that exam.
exactly. Like over here, in different states, you have to have different exams. So I was so confused because like in Canada, once I pass the Canadian board exam, I can practice anywhere in Canada. But that's not the same in America. Like
Hmm.
so, I was like, it's just a huge money grab. Like they're all testing the
Hmm.
same thing. Like how can you possibly make so many different tests in different areas? Um, but now that you mentioned about tests and whatnot, then how was your experience in residency and like um, any advice you give for people when in terms of a choosing the residency and a preparing for residency?
So I think choosing a residency really depends on what you like best during your medical school rotations, during clerkship, and during fourth year. But I think that also really need to take more of a pragmatic approach these days as well. And what I mean by that is that there's only a set number of residency spots in the country, and the number of medical school spots have been increasing, whereas the number of residency spots have actually been decreasing. And so this was one of the first years in which we really had a problem with that, where people who wanted some of the more competitive specialties, which historically are stuff like surgery, dermatology, even internal medicine this year, were extremely competitive. And a lot of people, even from our class, didn't end up matching to a residency in the first round. Because how it works is you have the first round where um, basically it's open to only Canadian students, and everyone really applies to what they want to do. And then after that round ends, there's some spots that are left over and some candidates that are left over. And then they open the spots to international graduates as well. And so then you're also competing against the international graduates. Um, and it is a little bit more stressful. And so a lot of people in our class in London, for instance, who really wanted like a surgical specialty, had a lot of difficulties this year, ended up having to go through the second ratch and doing something like family medicine. And it was really tough for them because a lot of those people were really good candidates. But it was just a matter of the fact that this year with COVID, we were only allowed to do electives in our home site. So you couldn't go around the country to really show your face, to get to know other people. And I think that really, really hurt a lot of their chances. And it was just a really unfortunate year. And so my advice is figure out what you want to do, but also consider having a backup in something that you'll still be happy in.
That's really good. And then in terms of preparing for residency, say they get in and how like I know you're still very new to it, but anything that was unexpected for you when you're going into your residency and anything you've done, you're happy that you did to prepare for your residency.
One of the things I'm really happy for is that um, I actually took the last 2 weeks of summer of our summer break, I guess, and I really used it as sort of a boot camp. It wasn't too intense. I just studied maybe like 3, 4 hours a day, but that was actually really helpful for me because on my first day in the emerge, when you haven't really seen a patient since January and you've spent a lot of time just doing interviews, it can be really daunting. So just knowing that you've refreshed a lot of your content going in was really helpful as well. And so I think that that really helped, and that really helped me stay confident going into to start residency essentially. And not to say that I wasn't a nervous wreck because I still really was nervous, but it did help.
Nice. And you mentioned about the interview. So, any advice in terms of like helping, like in terms of preparing for interviews? I know you went to family, so it may be different from like the surgical ones. But like, if you know about the experience from your classmates or anything like that,
Hmm.
like any advice or general advice at least you can give to anyone preparing for residency interviews.
I'd say practice broadly. So that what that means is that don't only practice with your friend circle, start practicing with people you never talk to, for instance. Even though it's weird, just shoot them a message and say, "Hey, do you want to practice interviews? I'm looking for a different opinion," or blah blah blah, because oftentimes the people who don't know you very well can give you insights that the people that you know very closely are kind of blind to. And so having done that with a few people, it really showed a different perspective that I didn't have. And it's important because interviewers are all going to be strangers to you. They're not going to know who you are. You want to know how you're presenting yourself to someone who has never met you before.
That's a really good advice. And I think regardless, even if you're not doing a residency interview, like just in general, if you're doing an interview for medical school or like other professional school, I think that's a really good advice that people should keep or take to heart. And then like during, I guess aside from the interview, like was there anything else that you needed to prepare for, or you felt like you did that helped you for your residency application?
Um, For the application itself, so extracurriculars are always helpful. I was in quite a few clubs during medical school, and I did research the first summer, so I thought that that was pretty helpful. But there's no really one formula to success for that. I think that if you really just try to be a well-rounded candidate and you show interest in the field that you're applying to, then you'll have really good chances. And a lot of it's really going to come down to as well your reference letters and how well you do on your rotations. When you're in fourth year, that's when you really need to shine. And so you really need to be focusing on, um, for your important rotations, basically, you got to do very well. You got to impress your preceptors so you can get good letters, get interviews, and get into the program you want to get into.
For like for those people who are like more shy on the shyer side and don't like to like go out there and like do that, did is that hard? Like, do you think like I don't know if any of your classmates were like that, but they find it difficult to approach like the attendings and to like really get to know them because I've seen it like during my rotation and whatnot, like of like the clerks doing that, and like I know some are just like it's like it's not me. I don't like to just like like in their words like kiss up to the attendings and whatnot. How do you I guess approach that then? Like, how do you well any advice?
I think it's challenging because that's one of those things where um, being too shy can be it's unfortunate, but it can be very limiting in that regard. Because at the end of the day, applying to residency is almost like a job interview, so you really have to sell yourself. And as hard as it is, unfortunately, you have to make that effort. If you are going for something that's very difficult, you really have to really stand out above everyone else. And so in order to do that, you unfortunately have to go out there and show yourself, even if you are shy. It is going to be very challenging, but you have to make that conscious effort to try and do it. If you're doing something like for instance, family medicine, while certain sites are competitive, it is generally a lot more chill of an application, I'd say, because there's simply a lot more spots in that specialty. Compared to something like dermatology has like 2 spots per school, and family medicine sometimes has like hundreds of spots per school. And so when I was applying to family medicine, I knew that I didn't have to be the number one candidate to get a spot. So I knew that I needed to do decent. Just I didn't have to be the number one. Whereas if I want to be a plastic surgeon, I know that off the get go I have to really do well. I have to impress. But I wouldn't say that it really needs to be kiss ass because I found that a lot of the people who were just themselves and were genuine, friendly, showed interest in the subject and wanted to do well, managed to do very well in the match. And it was a lot of those people who were they really like to kiss ass, or they were very cocky and really had some of these other attributes. They weren't as successful, I thought. So just really try to be yourself, try to be friendly and engaging, but don't overdo it. Try to realize when you're actually just being annoying to your attending, essentially.
That's really really good advice.